at the Sunway Center for Planetary Health, Sunway University, Malaysia, and also Menka Gundan, the Program Director at ARROW, the Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women. Over to you, Nazia.
Thank you, Anis. Thank you, everyone, for joining today with this roundtable discussion on climate change, planetary health from the gender lens in ASEAN countries. So just to begin with, just to give you a quick overview what we did prior to this roundtable discussion, we sent out a survey, and as you can see on the screen, which is just coming up now. Okay, yeah, there it is. So if you see here, so we received 85 response from the respondents, out of which 77 were for the ASEAN countries, and the remaining were from South Asia countries. So I wouldn't go much into details here, but if you just can have a look at the age group and the gender who responded to this survey form. Next. And majorly, all of our respondents were working professionals. Yeah. So the noticeable thing that we found out from the survey was how it is affecting everyone's health, basically, and how different natural calamities are also affecting. So the major input that we received was for hotter days. So interestingly, out of 85 respondents, what we observed that only 39% of our respondents felt that men and women are experiencing climate change differently. And my assumption is this 39% is majorly the women. So what exactly and what makes us say that, yes, climate change is affecting us differently? We do see that there is high rate of heat stroke, more cases of heat stroke among women. We see that due to water insecurity, it actually is impacting our menstrual health. It also is impacting our mental and emotional stress that we are facing. And this is something that we cannot measure given any tool as well. So it is now important that we actually try and get into the conversation, open the barriers, and create a platform where we can actually speak. So we also had this question that where we asked them, how do you actually feel about, like, what is the connection between the three elements, between the three themes, climate change, gender, and health? So what interestingly the survey respondents would want to see is these 5 things that you see on the screen, that how is it actually affecting the women's, what local actions they can take, and the effects of pollution and deforestation on communities as well. And most importantly, what we need to also discuss, and that we'll be talking about in this roundtable discussion, is what specific role does women can play in climate change adaptation and gender equality in climate leadership. Next slide, please. So while we are waiting for the slides to come up, we would like to also share. No, it's not this one. I'm not sure if it's only me who cannot see the screen. It's not up. Sorry, there's some technical glitch. So while my colleague is trying to put up her screen, I'll just quickly get into the setting the scene. Why exactly are we here? What are we going to talk about? So it's all about talking about climate change and how is it reversing the gender equality gains. We do understand that women are disproportionately affected by the climate change, and it's also affecting the food and health insecurity. So if you see in Southeast Asia, 17% of women lack access to nutritious food. 38% of pregnant women suffer from anemia. And it is also the heat strokes, the heat pollution is also adding on to menstrual disorders. If you have come across these days, we have been having these cases of endometriosis a lot in the South and Southeast Asia. And if we have to talk about the political and environmental leadership gaps, so we do know that women holds 23% of seats in the parliamentary, but interestingly, they are still absent from the key environmental ministries as well. And only three, to be specific, there are only three ASEAN countries, namely Cambodia, Indonesia, and Myanmar, who include gender in their climate plans. So this is, now we are getting the reality check. Like out of 10 ASEAN countries, it's only three ASEAN countries who are actually focusing on gender. Next slide. Last year in 2024, Global 50/50 came up with a report. Global Health 50/50 came up with this report on gender justice and planetary health. It focused on the interlinked crises and collective solutions. So the percentages that you see here is interesting, that out of 99 or non-for-profit organizations, 37% organizations actually did not mention of gender in their work, and only 24% focus on gender transformative works. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the triple interlinkages in Southeast Asia. So since we'll be talking more about the livelihoods, the sectoral impacts and well-being, so these are the things that we'll be focusing and looking at from the from gender perspective, from planetary health perspective, and as well as from climate change. Next slide. Yeah. So the case for gender responsive planetary health, where we put women at the front lines of resilience. So my colleague Menka will be focusing more on that. But before, but before getting into that, I would just like to mention, like, why do we have to speak or talk or discuss about the gender equity as a key to planetary health? So I would like to mention like 4 key points here. So the first one would be focusing on climate neutral policies, risk enforcing inequality. Second would be on gender responsive approaches, yielding better health and climate solutions and outcomes. Third would be women's leadership, enhancing sustainability. And the fourth and the last one would be to have an inclusive financing and policy frameworks. So the entire roundtable discussion for today would be around all these key themes and key areas itself. Over to you, Menka.
Thank you, Nazia, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll quickly take you through the intersection of gender and planetary health and climate change. And we'll start off with why or what is gender inclusive climate action. In a lot of the climate discourse discussions at the moment, especially as we in the UNFCCC space are reviewing the gender action plan, you hear this very frequently, this terminology very frequently. And so before we go a bit further in talking about how women are on the front lines and how women are being incorporated in policy, we need to understand the gender inclusive climate action and what the terminology means. And it acknowledges and integrates that there is difference in policy frameworks, strategies, project design, and implementation. What gender responsive climate action seeks to address is the inequalities in the context of climate change. It's in here that we talk about the intersectional approach. So we just don't talk about gender per se in terms of sex or gender in terms of the sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, but we also talk of gender in terms of intersectionality, the other social structures that inherently make you unique to yourself and that influence the way you experience climate change. So all of this is related in terms of gender inclusive climate action. And then this can also differ from individuals based on their gender identities. So the way you experience climate change also differs in the way that you differ in terms of your gender identities. So these are inherent things that we need to understand. before we delve deeper into the discourse around gender and climate. Next slide, please. Okay, so we further go on to say that, why is gender inclusive climate action then important? Nazia has mentioned some of these in reasons already, but what I'd also like to state is in terms of women and other disadvantaged groups are likely to be more impacted negatively by the effects of climate change. One example that stands out is the increase in gender-based violence that we see around climate change. Either it's pre-onset or post-disasters, and there is a compounding risk for women and girls' safety. So when we're doing climate solutions, we must address these differentiated vulnerabilities in their design and implementation, or we risk the undoing progress of gender equality. So basically, if we're talking about sustainable development, we need to ensure that we are, encapsulating these reasons in the design of the work that we're doing. So if we are to talk about women's economic empowerment or women's business case models in relation to planetary health, we need to talk about these other implications there might be for women, which will then directly or indirectly impact their ability to be able to participate in that economic empowerment activity or in that business case model. Okay, sorry, I somehow automatically went into a breakout room. Right. Okay. So there are also existing gaps between women and men across leadership, employment, entrepreneurship that are likely to widen in terms of the green transition if concerted effort is not made to address them. So when we're talking about green economies or blue economies, these terms that are coming up in our discussions more and more often, we need to also ensure that women and gender diverse people are part of these conversations, and they're being taken to account, that there is all these intersections that are at play in influencing how just transition models are being implemented. This is because sectors poised for the most growth in net zero transitions, such as renewable energy, are also sectors where women are least represented as workers and leaders. So basically, when we're making these transitions, for instance, in renewable energy, because women are not only, still underrepresented in these sectors, there will be this greater likelihood of the finished product, or in terms of the consumership of these just transition models, it wouldn't take into account the requirements and needs of women. We'd also see that sectors that will be most associated with this will not be able to, where women are most concentrated as energy users, may not be able to uptake the needs of women to fulfill those sectors that women are most concentrated in. For instance, manufacturing sectors. So all of these things we need to also ensure when we're talking about things like renewable energy, like just transition models, or like blue economies and green economies, we need to ensure that women also, as market users, are part of these models and are part of these discussions. Next slide, please. And then also, we need to ensure that women's voices and those of racial, ethnic minorities, LGBTQI plus individuals, persons with disability, refugees, displaced persons, indigenous people, and any other marginalized groups are essentially secured and are just an inclusive, non-carbon future. So we need to ensure that women business leadership has been linked to more robust climate targets and improved outcomes. So when we are also talking about these climate outcomes, we need to ensure that women business models are also included. When we talk of economic models in relation to climate induced disasters or climate resilience per se, we need to ensure that women are also part of this. We now see a big shift in the agriculture industry where we're looking at more resilient crop bases. Women farmers tend to be more of smallholder farmers, or and may not be able to, because of their land poverty, may not be able to make it into those discussions, into those consultations. But it is as important in terms of food security to have these types of smallholder farmers, especially women farmers who may not have land which is in their name but are still farmers, and are still crop holders, to be able to access these sort of new climate resilient technologies when it comes to agriculture. Gender and inequality in climate resilience building is what we wanted to talk about next. And women and men are affected differently by climate change. We see, and they respond to climate change differently. They respond to disaster risk reduction differently. Women's vulnerability also include poverty, limited access to productive assets and services, low education, levels of poor access to information, and discriminatory social cultural norms, compromising adaptive capacity. So that's why we say that we both are on different standpoints when it also comes to adaptation. Absence of certain groups from climate change politics and policymaking. This is largely because climate debates have been shaped stereotypically masculine and alienate concerns of certain groups, example, women. You would always see that there is a greater representation of men in climate decision-making spaces. And that's the other area which is of concern as we move into very critical notions of climate change, which will have detrimental effects to for populations. And men are overburdened to ensure security of families and planning for livelihoods. So this is also where our stereotypical patriarchal gender roles come at play. Whilst we might understand that, there's this economic security of families, which is a very older notion, sits with men, but also the care burden, the daily use of resources, which are directly impacted by climate change, is being utilized by women, is being managed in households by women. But we also see that economic shift where there is either equal economic burden being taken by men and women in households. And also we see that shift where there are greater number of households which are women-led as well. So we also need to understand these, and we also need to domestically, where we see in a lot of the DRR policy making and a lot of the post-disaster assessments and surveys that are done by National Disaster Management Office, we usually have the head of household surveys. We also need to see that there is a shift in that, so that the methodology goes above and beyond the traditional and conservative definition of head of household. So and not inherently discounts women and households which are led by women. Next slide, please. Increasing access to climate products or services. As we delve deeper into economic empowerment and business cases for women in relation to green and blue economies, we also need to see services and products that can be utilized by women, for instance, climate-linked insurances, to ensure that type of resilience, particularly those that are disproportionately benefit women, girls, and men. So, we see some matrix insurances, climate crop insurances, all of that come up, but we need to see more of that, and we need to ensure that women and also other diverse genders of people, also intersectionally marginalized people are able to access that. And it's just not available to a certain group of people, so that there is greater resilience building around sustainability of these initiatives. Providing access to climate mitigation products or services where women and girls are primary stakeholders and beneficiaries. So what I said before in terms of transitioning from solid or fossil fuel to cleaner household energies, we need to ensure that there's greater access to these mitigation products and services for women and girls. If we are talking about biofuels, etc., what do these mean? What types of products and services would be available to ensure that is there? All of these things need to be incorporated. Next slide. Okay, I'm done with that. Over to you, Nasia.
Thank you. I'll give it back to Anis.
All right. Thank you so much to Nazia and Manka for setting the scene and the tone perfectly for our roundtable discussion today. Moving on to our first intervention of the day, I would like to invite Ms. Jaya Malar Samuel, Capacity Building Director of the All Women's Action Society, AWAM, and member of the Reproductive Rights Advocacy Alliance Malaysia, to deliver her intervention on grassroots realities. So, Ms. Jaya Malar, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the opportunity that's given to us in Awam. I hope you all can hear me clearly. Okay, thank you. So, what I'm going to share with y'all is stories from the ground on women's climate struggle. Next slide, please. So when I was working on these presentations, we saw that a lot of impacts on climate change on women, but the topic, because the time frame was given to me, is 15 minutes. So some of the areas that I will be capturing in my in the stories from the ground is scarcity on food resources. One or two, the case study will also show increase in violence, displacement, and also double burden. Next slide, please. So the first one is the impact of forest degradation on indigenous and rural women. This is one of the three themes is given to me. The first story is from West Papua, and it's a title "Visit to Marine Family." Next slide. So we can see here, I think, which is West Papua is one of the third largest area of primary tropical forest. And the forest has been converted into logging and palm oil development, whereby they've lost through this development is loss of connection to traditions. And there was this report of Shea submarines are slowly starving. Children suffer from malnutrition. Women unable to feed themselves and children. They're also unable to teach traditional skills or take pride in their abilities, what they work in the forest. And the rivers are also contaminated. And so whatever the women were doing in this case study is that they started to take part in the movement to protect their customary land. And what they do is they insist of taking their children to the forest to get to know their plants, animals. Although with the forest deforestation, they were not able to take the children, and they have to mostly stay in their homes and unable to work. But when they had the opportunity, they bring their children, so the children gets to know about the plants and also the animals, and sharing stories and songs to the children, and also celebrating cultural significance of forest. Next slide, please. So this is the second story whereby it's taken from Sumatra, Indonesia, Bata community. Next. Here is the Batak Toba community. It's the indigenous community of the forest region of North Sumatra. And here also the same thing, whereby the forest where they primarily stay is converted into monoculture and export-oriented agriculture products, including palm oil. And in the Tabak women, naturally, they are the breadwinners and also the main producers of household food crops. However, they have limited control over agricultural land due to the patriarchal property rights. And they are given a permissive right to use family and community land for cultivation of food. However, due to deforestation and men going out to source for alternative income, they slowly lose their position, and they also face a situation whereby with the influx of money that the family gets and also increase of agribusiness companies, it influences the gender relation, whereby women has to depend more on the men for their needs, for the family needs and financial needs, which further push them to marginalization. And also, the next slide, please. So due to that, and due to also the Islamic principle and the culture that restricted women's rights to freedom and especially to participate in public actions, they did take action. They did involve at the community level resilient activities, which is acceptable to their gender norms, whereby they don't how they don't face too much of restrictions or biasness from the community. So some of them use their voice to advocate for justice against perpetrator. They did a naked protest in December 2021, and they also face a lot of backlash for that protest. and they feel they were intimidated and assaulted by thugs and corrupt military personnel hired by the perpetrator. So it shows that when women also take action, some of them sometimes it's culturally inclined actions are taken. When they're bold and strong, they also face backlashes from their community or wider stakeholders. Next slide, please. So this is just a quote which is taken from the Human Rights Watch. Next slide. So this is the second theme. This is climate-linked resource scarcity and care work burden. Next slide. So here, I did not specifically choose a case study, but I just didn't want to fill too many case studies. So I decided just to say that why is the scarcity of resources? One is having access to assets, where due to the lack of diversification of their assets, women also have less access to resources to cope when the disaster or climate change happens. Access to technology, most rural women usually have less access to technological resources, or they don't understand, so that is a problem they were facing. And access to forecast, also the same situation, whereby information is often transmitted in a way that it doesn't reach women, or language barriers, or they don't, maybe they could be illiterate, they are not able to read. So this prevents them from effectively preparing for oncoming crises. And land ownership, as we also heard earlier in the presentation, whereby there is lack of or limited land ownership, where they have, or they could be sharing the land with the community, or they don't have they have limited access to the land or authority on the land, whereby they couldn't make decisions and manage resources, or even getting credits when they need the credit, financial resources to address the land situation. Next slide. So here, what I did here is we looked at care work burden. This is a story from Malaysia, from a report from Science Direct Malaysia, whereby it shows that some voices we captured. One is the care work, which is mainly taken over by women, even in a normal situation. It shows that it deteriorates human health, because when there is a climate crisis happens, it increases also domestic care demand on women who look after sick people. So to quote this, I've shared a story here from Uring Muan Kayan, women in Sarawak, who have to care for her incapacitated husband with limited supply to clean water. This has happened to her after the flood incident that happened in 2016, and this report was done in 2016 with Arrow, and then it was also reviewed again in 2021 after COVID. So beside the deteriorating human health, it's also lack of mobility. When a climate disaster happens, both men and women will lose their incomes, but for men, mostly they do able to get away outside of their province or the village to go out and get for a job. But however, for women, due to the care work, they remain staying in their own villages. And even such disaster happens or flood happens, they are overwhelmed and overburdened, not only taking care of the family, but they also have to take care of the flood, address the flood situation. So this is another voice of whereby a woman had mentioned, I don't have time to go for farming because I do all the chores by myself. Since I'm alone, because her husband works from a different village, it is difficult to look for food or ration water. Now I'm alone doing all the cleaning of the forest. And beside these two stories, we also have read a lot of stories of women whereby they have to taking care of children some of the time, not only doing to care work, in the sense they, due to the forest deforestation and things like that, where my women also unable to provide for themselves food, and also unable to provide food for the children, where sometimes it leads to illness and also death. Next slide. So SRHR access during climate crisis. Next. So in here, we captured few slides. One is just to show sexual reproductive health right access during climate crisis, where it's how to say, when there is a crisis, what happens in SRHR is disrupt services. Whereby one, they may not be able to go back to the clinics or the hospitals where they have access to contraceptive on the normal situation, but due to crisis, they may not have access to it, because there are a lot of hindrances, or also maybe they can't prevent pregnancies because they have less access to contraceptive, or due to influx of foreign people, outside men coming into the land, and there's a change in the lifestyle also leads to increase in STI, HIV, where there is also limited access to services. Maternal health risks, heat exposure does harm pregnancy, unsafe conditions whereby during flood or during disaster where women have less access to clean water during birth, and also less access to clean water during menstrual period. Increase in violence, we have seen many studies that shows during crisis is also increase in violence, whereby a lot of stress happens, or also because girl child could have been taken as a burden or not able to provide more mouth to feed. Sometimes the girl child has been forced into marriages. And also it is also incidents happens whereby marginalized groups needs for SRHL are ignored, even in the normal situation where it gets worse during the LGBT, during a crisis situation. Next slide. So the next slide, I do not know why it's hanging. It's a story of us from Palawan, whereby there is this is a story. It's kind of a success story, whereby this fisherwoman, she's a mother of 6 and struggled as a climate change and overfishing made it harder for her to feed her family. With limited access to reproductive health, it further pressured mountain and further lead her to poverty. But through international NGO and local NGO, she was able to gain access to family planning and also intervention taken place on sustainable fishing training and women's leadership support. And this is a voice that says, I choose when to stop having children. For the first time, I had a choice. As we know, in countries like Philippines, where access to contraceptive is limited, and so there is when this support, it helped her to take control over her health, her family, and also address the climate change situation that happened in her village. Next slide. Okay, the next one, it's just to say that under the SRHR access to during crisis, besides sharing the story, I also wanted to share that this international NGOs like IPPF and UFME, maybe there's also others, who does implement and train grassroots NGOs and partners, including local government, on minimum initial service package, whereby it shows what are the essential service packages, SRH service packages, as crucial during humanitarian crisis to improve SRH outcome during crisis. And this has been done in various countries in Asia Pacific and also beyond Asia Pacific, where such trainings are done with the grassroots, whereby also bringing people, different level of stakeholders together to address such crisis happens, how the SRH access is provided, especially the minimum essential services. Next. Okay, while we're doing these presentations and these slides, through reading some of the reports, I just picked some 3 recommendations, which is as part of the key intervention, which is very relevant to the grassroots, especially with the topic that was given to me, grassroots realities. One is empower women's livelihood, support women's financial independence, which we also saw in some of the stories. Most stories that I shared, they don't have financial independence, they don't have access to their own right to the land. So it shows it's important to support women's financial independence and also give them income generating activities, and indigenous practice like plant conservation and permaculture needs to be cultivated, and also has to be mainstream. Strengthen women's network and safe space, create a safe platform for women to share climate and environmental experiences, because we also saw in the earlier case studies where when women were strong in voicing out their concerns or advocating, sometimes they do face backlashes. Encourage collaboration among grassroots women's group. If there's non-established grassroots women's group, especially with the current places whereby there's more further collaborations, maybe they could be doing it on their standalone without any collaborations. Provide support networks to hold local officials accountable and amplify women's voices. This is also done in various projects at the, how to say, like for example, minimum essential service packages when such programs are done. Also, local grassroots communities and welfare hospitals and all are even other NGOs are brought together to really build the network to support men and women during climate crisis or during humanitarian. Decolonize environmental justice, I think reframe policies, reflect local and indigenous knowledge systems, and ensure equitable distribution of environmental resources and design environmental protection policy that prioritize community resilience. So these are the recommendation. I'm being mindful of the time. And I think that's it from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jaya, for delivering your intervention on grassroots realities. Next, I would like to introduce our second intervention of the day on regional advocacy models. Our first speaker, Puan Norliza binti Hashim, Chief Executive of Urbanese Malaysia, will deliver her intervention on regional advocacy models with special emphasis on the ASEAN Sustainable Urban Forum 2025, a Women's Assembly. Puan Norliza, you should be able to share your screen if you would like to share any slides with us, but otherwise, the floor is yours to deliver your intervention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anis. Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I just feel that over the last 20 minutes, I've been listening to very wonderful presentation and sharings. I think a lot of people are working in this space, and I'm actually quite excited to know that we have so many champions working on this similar space. Probably from my perspective, I come from an organization, Urbanese Malaysia. We are a center of excellence under the Ministry of Housing and Local Government. So probably a lot of people will be wondering why we work on the climate change space. I think it's because more and more of our cities now are facing a lot of natural disasters. And of late, even though when we started our work track is in realizing that we have to do a lot of post evacuation, post cleaning up operation during disasters. And I think this is when we realize that how important it is to have a local climate action plan. So, in talking about advocacy, well, not so much maybe in ASEAN, but I think in Malaysia, definitely when we talk about governance, first of all, it's very important that, this is where it all started, so for Malaysia, unfortunately, our national climate policy is not specifically mentioning on the gender aspects, and I think this is something that is worth looking at again if we were to revise our national climate policies. However, when we looked at our nationally determined contributions for the period of the 2021-2030, we did acknowledge elements of gender when we, added to our commitments in terms of more inclusive and how we mainstream our actions across genders, youth, as well as vulnerable groups. This is, of course, in consideration of adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So we are hoping that now we are in the process of undertaking our Malaysia national adaptation plan. We are hoping to see more of this being added into advancing sustainability as well as climate resilience and integrating gender inclusive planning at this level. Of course, at our 5-year plans, there are statements on gender responsive climate policies, and I think this is where we are hoping that in the coming 13th Malaysia Plan, this will be strengthened further lah. We have policies talking about empowering women and gender equality. And of course, it does not specifically mention climate change, but it does recognize all cross-cutting issues that the women as well as all gender groups are facing lah. So I think this is why of late, especially even for us, we are looking at a bottom-up approach in dealing with this situation lah. I think if you are just waiting for the policies to be in place, I think this is where one policies takes time to be prepared, to be advocated, and that's why there's a lot of work done in Malaysia towards a bottom-up approach in preparing communities as well as cities in terms of what kind of actions can they do to adapt in addressing their local challenges. Urbanese itself, we undertook 9 case studies last year in different kinds of scenario, areas which are flood prone, areas which were facing landslides, coastal erosion. And one of our major approach is actually to look at the vulnerability levels of the local community. And in doing that, of course, we identify the gender profile of the area. So I think in general, we can easily say, as what have been said in previous speakers, that definitely different gender groups faces different challenges, and different gender groups also have emotionally different are affected differently. And I think this is where when we would undertake a local action, it is very, very important that your action is not one action that fits all levels of community. We have also, like in a case of one case study story in Yan, Kedah, Northern State, we have community groups, championed by women in terms of how they address communities and how they, empower local communities to work together. And I think this is where it is very, very important that no matter what, we can come up with a blueprint at the national level. We believe that it is the local community that knows best lah. We have seen solutions done at the local level, which are very basic. For example, in Jerantut, we are seeing how 3 different villages communicate with one another because they actually institutionalize a very simple warning system between one village to another village because of the timing of the disasters that happens in the areas are like half an hour or an hour between each flood occurrence. And we saw how in Ranau Sabah, communities reorganize on how they should do their plantings and how they should manage their land in order that they do not create more unnecessary landslides affected by heavy rains and due to climate change. So I think we hear a lot of these good stories, as what other previous speakers have mentioned. And I think this is where, when we talk about gender, climate change, and gender, whether it's gender responsive or gender, I just don't want to use the word responsive actually, because I do feel that when we talk about gender and then we add into the word responsive, it's as if that whatever we are doing, we just have to be responsive to the gender. But I think it should be more gender inclusive that we should be looking at in terms of policies, advocacy programs, actions, and whatever that we do. But it's not easy to be gender inclusive. And I think this is even when we were doing gender profiling, a lot of the data is just men and women. And if you want to aggregate in all ways to divide it by different social groupings, you will not be able to do so in a very orang kata organized manner, or rather same level of data for for every city or every towns. So this is where I think how do we, when we talk about advocacy or when we talk about local actions, how do we bring this inclusive climate action bottom up? Yeah? How do we bring it to subnational governments, and how do we bring it up to national governments? So I think there not only should be a top-down system, there should also be a bottom-up system. And how do we recognize the role of so many others, whether it's NGOs or whether it is, civil society, CSOs that are involved in this kind of work. So I don't think that this is one area that has been well organized. And I think we are pressing for time. And because of that, we are also having this discussion at a Women's Assembly during our ASEAN Sustainable Urbanization Forum, which will take place on the 11th of August. And Sunway Planetary Health Center is our partner, and we do hope to invite everyone for this discussion. The whole idea on having this discussion is actually to see how women, especially and climate policy making, not only in Malaysia but also across ASEAN, can take a more active or more dominant or more visible role. And at the same time, how do we look at the leadership that women can provide, whether it's at grassroots, at policy making, as frontliners in terms of climate adaptation. But most importantly, for me, it's actually to create a network. And I think that is the power of when you build networks, when you do it together, you can resolve a lot of issues bottom up. And here, there's so much people working at the ground. You are all advocating the same agenda, the same championing the same cause. So I think this is where you will achieve better if we put all our ideas together. So I think that's all I have for now. I haven't managed to put up a slide together because I'm very sorry for not having a proper slide lah. But happy to discuss and also happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa, and no worries about not having your slides in time. I think your intervention was very impactful and could probably lead to the discussions later on. So next, I would like to invite our second speaker for the same second intervention on regional advocacy models, Dr. Maria Rosa Bing and Carrion, the President of the National Council of Women of the Philippines, NCWP. She's also an advisor for the Philippine Climate Change Commission under the Office of the President of the Philippines and a member of the ASEAN Confederation of Women's Organizations, ACWO. Dr. Maria will be delivering her intervention with special emphasis on the Philippines and its neighboring countries. Dr. Maria, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, all the participants in this fantastic forum. I am so honored to represent the National Commission of Women of the Philippines in this endeavor. First, I'd like to share the role of Filipino women in climate change. The women in the Philippines take an active role in climate mitigation, especially led by our two senators, that's Senator Loren Legarda, who is considered a respected international advocate for climate change, and also Senator Risa Hontiveros. The two of them work on policies in government to ensure that women are protected, because at the end of the day, all of us realize that women are the carriers of the burden in the households, because they need to protect their children. They need to ensure that the water that their families drink is clean. They ensure that the food in the table is sustainable and healthy. And therefore, they take the brunt of all the problems that unmitigated climate change problems arise. In the Philippines, we are ranked as first in climate-related disasters, especially in the period of 2023 and 2024, because of the huge super typhoons, floods, and droughts that have visited our country. We actually have a flood or a typhoon every other month. So our communities have prepared themselves to be able to protect their families and their communities to be safe. No, the local government units have banded together. All the mayors have banded together to give budgets for the barangays in order that all the families are safe. They create safe houses during heavy typhoons where families can go and be safe. There are other means. They prepare clean water supply, healthy food. But in the country, it is rather difficult because we have over 100 million Filipinos. So there are displaced people during typhoons who lose their livelihoods, and thus continues the increased poverty problems. The last 10 years, disasters have increased by 50%, and therefore, the coastal communities become at risk from rising sea levels. The geographical vulnerabilities are so apparent that the government is taking serious steps to be able to correct this. Historically, Filipino women have made a significant stride in the various fields, especially in climate change mitigation. There are exemplary women leaders, like I mentioned, Senator Loren Legarda, Senator Grisa Hontiveros, and lately Antoinette Taus, who has been named Oxfam Ambassador for Resilience, and also Isa Calzado, who has volunteered with the World Fund Philippines to promote environmental education and sustainable living. These women actually travel the country talking to all the communities to explain how best they can do to be able to uplift the lives of the marginalized people and protect themselves during high-risk typhoons and floods. So the leading community efforts and sustainable businesses have improved the protection of the communities at large. Now, the women, their greatest challenges during climate change are in the areas of water collection, caregiving of old people, the welfare of young children, and the mayors of each local government unit is trying very hard to address all these problems. They do forums for women to teach them what to do during these times, and they are able to show examples. And what they do is they give awards to communities that exemplify their work and how to protect their community during climate change typhoons. They give priority to children's health, safety, and actually food availability. It is very important that the community organizations become very aware of the problems, especially to protect their lands and the plants that create food sources for everyone. They also encourage women entrepreneurs in renewable energy and ecotourism so that they are able to empower everyone to be economically independent. This is very important for women to rise up and be able to be recognized as strong pillars of their community in these areas. The women in policy and advocacy, like Senator Loren Legarda and the late Gina Lopez, and now Risa Ontiveros, are working very hard to be able to address all these problems. Now, the future goals for a climate resilient Philippines is we're hoping that by 2030, we will be able to reduce by 30% the emission of all this arising from cars and all the fossil fuels. We want to reduce 60% of the renewable energy capacity, and we want to be able to establish climate resilient infrastructures so that the buildings and the homes do not consume much energy. They want to use much of solar now. We are very much into solar energy, which actually will reduce our emissions as a whole. We also are very conscious that we are doing ways to empower all the women and the families through education, nonstop forums, and examples, through actually adverts and storytelling in various communities, because that is very effective to tell stories of how each community can help themselves to be able to mitigate all these climate change problems. By 2050, we want to transition to a sustainable economy by achieving net zero emissions. We're very strict with this now. And we want gender responsive policies by coordinating with government to be able to ensure that bills are passed towards these objectives, and so that we may be able to achieve resilient and strong communities against all these adversities. So our mode of action is from surviving to thriving. So how do we do this? We do it by policy and governance. We strengthen gender-sensitive climate policies. We ensure that our government officials are aware of all the problems in the communities, because they surely live in the same areas, except that their houses are stronger than those of the barrios and the sitios. We involve community engagement. We support grassroots initiatives led by women. The women are very powerful in this aspect. They gather everyone, and what they do now is they do a monthly organized forum in all the communities, and the local government units attend to this, and they give prizes to communities that are able to show great improvement in their areas. I think it's very important for people to realize this, because once the other communities realize what positive changes incur in these communities that thrive, they follow suit, and therefore it becomes an effective government policy. We also push for innovation and technology. We invest in renewable energy and infrastructure. We also do partnerships and collaborations. We strengthen and foster multi-sector alliances, because this is the only way that our country will survive. This has proven effective, because what the women do is they lead these initiatives, and they do not stop until government and the local government units look up and attend to their concerns. They also do this through education, and to education, we give women the tools to focus on their leadership and entrepreneurship. We uplift them. We give them tools in terms of reading materials, and strengthen the relationships and networking systems, so that they're able to exchange information among themselves and among each other. Now, what do? We are now calling to action so that climate change becomes a human rights issue. This is very important. Filipino women are the custodians of homes. They are the lead caregivers. They are the women community leaders. They are the ones who effect change and transform lives. we honor them by giving them all the tools they need to be able to effect this change. They have become politically aware as well, and they are able to run as barangay captains in the respective communities, whereby they are able to lead their communities in change for climate change mitigation. Our collective responsibility to create a thriving Philippines is working one day at a time. I will be honored to answer any questions if you have questions during the question and answer portion. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present my paper.
Thank you, Dr. Maria, on your engaging presentation of your intervention. Up next on our agenda is the third intervention on feminizing green economies. I would like to introduce Ms. Alfa Nur Aini Erman Effendi, researcher at the National Council for the Blind Malaysia, NCBM, who will be delivering her intervention titled Agriculture and Just Transitions for Women in Climate Vulnerable Sectors. Ms. Alfa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hanis, and the organizer for inviting me. And on behalf of the National Council for the Blind Malaysia, I'm honored to be here today. And for this topic, I will present on behalf of in the perspective of women with disabilities. So, as an introduction, when we say the feminizing green economy, we're not just talking about adding more women into the picture. We're also talking about changing the whole way we think about economy, from profit and extraction to care, dignity, justice, and sustainability. For women with disabilities like myself, this shift is deeply personal. We are already impacted by climate change in our daily lives. So, and we also knowledge holders, caretakers of our community and agents of adaptation. The problem is we rarely recognize that way. Often we are seen as passive beneficiaries or just part of a social group, but we are also farmers, workers, leaders, and thinkers. So if we want a just green economy, we must be at the center, not at the margins. So what does it actually mean to feminize a green economy? As a women with disabilities, it's not about ticking a box or having women there for show. It's about changing values from extraction to regeneration, from hierarchy to participation, from productivity to care in interdependence. Women with disabilities have a lot to offer here. We understand interdependence, how people, ecosystems, and support systems are all connected. Many of us rely on informal network for survival, and we give back in ways that are often invisible, like caregiving, preserving local knowledge, or managing small farms. But we also face eco-ableism. That's when climate and environmental policies forget or exclude persons with disabilities. Like tools are not accessible, or the training is not adaptive, or productivity doesn't include the way we work, even in emergency response. Evacuation plans often don't think about our mobility needs. So if we want to build green economy that works for everyone, we need to design systems that include us from the beginning, not as an afterthought. So now I will talk about the economic what we want in the economic sector. Many women with disabilities are excluded from formal jobs and climate-related funding, not because we can't contribute, but because the system wasn't made for us. For example, if agricultural training doesn't consider visual or mobility access, how can we participate? We need to recognize that a lot of important work is happening outside the formal economy, like unpaid care work, small-scale farming, and community production. These forms of work are valid and must be supported. We also need to redistribution sources like land, tools, finance, and training. A just green economy must invest in inclusive cooperatives, accessible green jobs, and community-based solutions. And we need to shift how we measure success. It's not just about GDP, it's about dignity, autonomy, and collective well-being. In terms of politics, women with disabilities must be included in decision-making spaces, not as tokens, but as real participants. That means having meaningful quotas in climate councils, making public consultations accessible, and collecting data that reflects our lived experience. We also need to work closely with organizations of persons with disabilities and women's group and treat them as equal partners, not side participants. Climate policies must be right-based and intersectional. Gender and disability should not be separated from each other or from environmental planning. We need to be there from design to budgeting, from implementation to monitoring. For culturally, women with disabilities are often boxed into roles like caregivers or dependents, but we are more than that. We carry ecological wisdom passed down through generations. For example, blind women in rural areas may use storytelling to pass on planting calendars. Deaf women might use visual patterns to understand land changes. These are real, practical innovations that help our communities survive and adapt. This knowledge must be recognized and included in official strategies. We need to value this system as critical tools for resilience. So yes, we want to be respected as a woman, but also recognized as experts in our own right. So what can we do for moving forward? Government and donors should fund women-led and disability-inclusive cooperatives, ensure climate data and financial systems are accessible, eliminate eco-ableist regulations, involve women with disabilities in every stage of planning, stop seeing us only through a cultural lens, apply right-based intersectional frameworks, partners with organizations of persons with disabilities and women's group from the beginning. And before I conclude, I just want to say here that at NCBM, at the moment, we don't have any, we not yet have any initiative or initiative regarding to the inclusive green economy, but for this roundtable discussion, it's this presents a powerful future engagement with to us. So as organizer asked me to present about the success story, so at NCBM at the moment we don't have any success initiative yet, but hopefully in the future we will have. So as a conclusion, the future of green economies depends on people who've been left out for too long. Women with disabilities carry the knowledge, resilience, and leadership we need for just transitions. Let's not repeat the same exclusions under a new names. Let's build green economies that are inclusive, feminist, dignified, and just for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Alpha, for your intervention. We'll now transition to our facilitated roundtable discussions. So this segment is scheduled for the next 40 minutes, during which our facilitators will guide the conversation with a series of thought-provoking questions. To help create a more interactive and engaging atmosphere, we kindly encourage everyone to turn on your cameras during the discussion. Your participation, both visual and verbal, will make this a richer and more collaborative experience for all. So gender reminder that the breakout sessions will also be recorded and there will be a note taker in each breakout room as well. So we will reconvene here in the main meeting room once the 40 minutes are up. The facilitators will let you know when the time is up, and we hope the discussions will be productive and fruitful. So please head on over to your breakout rooms. You should have received a notification, and we will meet back here later after 40 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, Navrachi and Michelle. Could you please join the breakout group? Hi, Michelle, can you hear me? Michelle, can you hear me?
Okay, Lisa.
Yeah, hi, I'm Alyssa. I'm from All Women's Action Society and I'm the Assistant Advocacy Officer. In our organization, we mostly work with dealing with gender-based violence in Malaysia and particularly in Selangor. But so climate change, sustainability, and the intersection with gender is something that I think is quite new for us, but I think we're interested in seeing how we can amplify and support our sister organizations in their efforts. So I think communications work is very important for us and seeing how we can leverage each other's voices further.
You very beautiful, beautifully said. Okay, maybe last one, and then we can officially start. Anyone who wants to volunteer wants to go next, or maybe we can start, no? And if you would like to introduce yourself, okay, Nadia.
So sorry, I didn't see that.
Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Nadia. I'm from a group called Clean Action Malaysia. So we're a feminist and climate justice organization. We've been working on the issues on intersection between gender and climate governance for the past 5 years. And we're really hoping to hear some new perspectives from our ASEAN partners over here. And of course, really looking forward for the kind of discussions that we're going to have today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, we have some set questions that we wish to talk about for our session. Yes, very interesting to see that all of us are working on these intersections and how can we elevate or contribute to the global or regional discourse, or maybe at the national level we're with. And I think some of you are also new in these intersections, and that's fine. While some of us have been working for a long time now. But it's okay. I love the variety and the diversity of this group. But anyway, of course, this is a safe space. You can share your thoughts, ideas, very much welcome if you have questions. And that is the purpose of this breakout group anyway. So, and with that, I'm going to share the first question. I'm going to put it in the chat box. Okay, in what ways can gender responsive climate action strengthen planetary health outcomes and vice versa? Who would like to go next? Yeah, who would like to respond to these questions? Okay.
Maybe we
Can you
can
just,
Oh.
yes, Damia?
maybe we can start by breaking down what gender responsive means to everyone.
Okay, good suggestion. So, what do we mean by gender responsive climate action? So, when we say gender responsive climate action, these are the ways, recommendations, plans of action on with gender in using the gender lens. So basically, we see a lot of solutions, no? we see different types of options, approaches, recommendations, etc. But when we look at this, recommendations, where is gender? Where are women? Where are LGBT? So how do we incorporate that lens? How do we incorporate these sectors, these groups, when incorporating climate action? And how does it impact the planetary health outcomes and vice versa? I'll give you a minute to think about it. I'll just change my headset. Okay. Sorry about that.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah,
Just
sure.
coming like as a woman as well, I think I wanted to echo that women have stewardships for most of the a lot of resources and also improves biodiversity conservation when we kind of stand up for women as well. But I think it's also ensuring healthcare access for all genders during climate crises. I mean, in general, but especially during climate crises, and also to promote reproductive health and rights as part of the climate resilience. So I think
Where uh, one town one town in the middle of a lake was not a lake, it was a river, was technically cut away from everywhere else. And in that town, so we had to go there. It took them 5 days because I think this is related to the gender responsiveness and how during um, during environmental crises like typhoons, we don't really look at how our res our response to relief efforts or our response to climate change disasters affect specific people. Because in this particular town, there were um, about 3,000 population, where 1,400 are children below 16 years old. And the problem with this specific town is that at an early age, at 14, they already have their first child for the women there. Now, when I went there personally, because it was also COVID, so it was a disaster, a climate disaster during COVID. We were not allowed to leave the barangay, like the community center, because this town was so isolated that we might bring the COVID virus to them. And they were um, far down the list of people who they want to inoculate because they're really like in an island isolated by a river. So I was able to talk with women community representatives. So these were barangay captains or barangay tanod. So they were local government officials at the community level without sadly a lot of them they don't have a high school degree or have not graduated elementary at all, and most of them had their first kid or first child at 14 years old. By the time they're 18, they have three kids with different fathers. So, and then usually for this particular community, it's very interesting. Once they have a child at 14, they get kicked out of the home. The family builds another house for them to uh build this house from scratch so they can live with their partner. And then the cycle goes on. And one of the requests was um sex education in this particular community. And then, of course, although we have a lot of laws, our policy on sex education in the Philippines is still not there yet. It's not there yet at all. We don't have it, which is why we have high HIV cases because no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to educate people in school. They want God to stop HIV for some reason. So they don't see it in policy, in Philippine policy. There's something like that going on, which was not presented in the presentation for the Philippines, but it does exist. There's still deadlock on that. And when they asked me for this, for the sex education, I had to ask like religiously, do you prefer normal family planning, or would it be okay to look at alternative family planning? And they said they don't really care as long as the population would stop. Because in this community, not only they don't have a high school, they just have a learning center that can cater to 200 children. And they had 1,400 children. So only one area. Um, they did ask for printers because all of their books were gone. Um, we went back there again, but it was elections in 2022, gave some family planning, and I think one group went there and gave rosaries, like a rosary, like Catholic rosary, which I find like I think religion has to be separate from health at a certain point. But this is one issue. People don't see the effects of not equipping women with the right health options. And it's still present until now. That was 2020. I live 20 kilometers away from that area. And it still bothers me that it's just there near my area. Of course, when we did the relief effort, it was basic blankets. In terms of livelihood, 90% of them are fisher folk, so we gave them fishing equipment. The problem is we couldn't find any livelihood options for the women because most of the women, there's no other livelihood besides fishing in that island. So that's one thing. Um, so that's Barangay Mindoro in Barangay Mindoro in Bangar, La Union in the Philippines. It's North Philippines. So I can show the organizers later the exact area there.
Okay, thank you so much, Tina. So to those who wants to add on to this question, maybe we can use the chat box. But for the interest of time, we can move forward to the next question. I will put it in the chat box as well. Beyond vulnerability, how can women act as agents of change in the face of climate change? How can we help more women to rise to their leadership potential? So maybe in this question, we can think about the strengths or unique contributions of women when it comes to climate action in the forms of resilience, adaptation, or advocacy, or maybe in movement building or campaigning if we have that experience. And maybe we can look at the barriers now. What limits women's participations and leadership in these spaces as well? Any reflections so far?
I guess from Tina's story, it touches a lot on how important it is for girls to have their education at a young age, especially sex education. So I guess one point for improving leadership would be, particularly for that example that Tina gave for the barangay in Philippines, would be to strengthen women's education. Does anyone else want to add on? Maybe using an example that you know, or like a case study that you heard about.
Or maybe we can touch, yes, Eliza or Alisa.
Or you want to finish first, Nika? I can go after.
No, I just wanted to add some probing questions regarding this, but it's fine. Maybe Alisa and then Nadia can share. Okay.
Yes, so I'm quite relatively new to my organization, but from my understanding, in the past, when there was really heavy floodings, we would, try to solicit donations, funds in order to be the intermediary to give out necessities, including like menstrual hygiene products such as pads during floods, which we all know tends to get overlooked by like state or local level governance when handing out products to communities. But in thinking about this question, I think we need to move beyond seeing women and children as beneficiaries of these, of goods and services, but really like this question prompts us to ask to challenge and empower them to take a sense in their communities. And I'm just thinking about, because we have a helpline service in Awam, and what we see most of the time, this pattern of a lot of moms or daughters, a lot of these women will come to us not for their own needs, but usually for needs of somebody else, for their family member, for their child, for a friend even. And I think that's a pattern of great care that we can actually leverage on when it comes to sustainability and climate, right? Because often, even though, yes, it is a challenge and a burden, it can be a burden to be the one who's taking care of the household as well as outside communities. But it also means that women have the knowledge of their communities, who knows who's left alone at home, which grandma is saying alone, how can I help my neighbors? And if we're able to empower these women to be able to act as like the person who's like mapping their local communities and being the ones to be able to voice out, okay, really who is in our local areas and leverage on their knowledge in these areas, then when it comes to crises, when it comes to evacuations, they can be the point of contact for really like ensuring everybody in their communities are covered.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Lisa. I agree with you, maximizing local wisdom for lasting solutions. Okay, we can have Nadia next.
So sorry, I don't know how many minutes we have left so far.
We don't have a lot.
We don't have a lot. Okay, I'll be very brief. I think these three questions that you're asking, at least the ones I see on the PDFs that was circulated beforehand, it's really useful. And I think I would like to give some intervention on this particular question. How can women act as agents of change in the face of climate change? I think maybe to look at it at a more of a structural standpoint. Basically, what are the challenges for them to participate in let's say politics, let's say decision making spaces even within their communities, etc. And these are really difficult and complex questions, as I think some of the speakers previously have spoken about how committees and actions happening on ground is very heavily contextualized. And this also, how do I say this? This is also true for social norms in some communities where certain social norms are quite bad, not really following the norms of what we normally see in standards, let's say CEDAW or international law, etc. But I think it's really worth mentioning these structural barriers, and of course, how can financing help them? I think one of the main issues where I think is always goes under the rug or poorly understood is definitely on the financing of women as agents of change, right? And I felt there's a whole lot of discussion about it happening not only at COP but different multilateral forums like the UN SDGs, CEDAW, etc., etc. And I felt that these are some of the discussions that must enter when we talk about giving the power for women as agents of change, and it has to be linked to finance. And when we look into Malaysia, for example, um, for example, we have the agenda budgeting, but it's not really looking at women as agents of change, but it's really looking at the standpoint of view, like what the Alisa has mentioned, really as only as beneficiaries, how women can enter into these spaces, also in the program design, the program cycle, like Menka has mentioned from the beginning, from design, ideation, and then stewardship of the program, and then of course the monitoring, evaluation, of course the learning, putting all the learnings back into the programs itself. I think that is really, really critical when we talk about financing women as agents of change when facing different forms of climate action and governance. For example, they're not just being bombarded with all these different climate impacts, but also the different climate initiatives are happening on the ground. Let's say carbon offset projects happening on indigenous lands. We're talking about energy transition projects like the development of mega dams on this mega infrastructure happening on lands, solar panel farms, etc., etc. These are serious issues, and of course, I think our members here from the Philippines would know what is the impact of mining rare minerals, rare earth minerals, critical minerals, and I think these are really important issues. And yeah, I think we can talk more about this in other sessions, perhaps.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Nadia. Actually, you've covered two questions because I was about to move to our next question, which is about ASEAN policy recommendations. So I took note of your recommendations as well, apart from identifying root causes and looking at the context, at the national and regional context through a structural or systemic lens. You've also mentioned engaging in policy, in climate policy agendas such as SDG, CEDAW, and climate finance. Right. We have some few minutes left, but just to touch on some communications related questions, I'm gonna put here two questions. Briefly, we can talk about general ideas. What are the best ways to talk about gender responsive climate action, and what kind of information would be most helpful to local communities for them to be involved in grassroots climate action? Uh, very quickly, what are the basically communication ideas or communication activities that you think will be helpful to local communities or the grassroots level? Anyone?
Hi.
Yes.
Yes. I'm very involved in like grassroots, and one of the problems we have is really communication. But one thing that we do is think about it like ads, like advertising for the environment, because it has to be short. The content has to be short and has to be translated in the local language. So in terms of talking to the communities, if the language, because the Philippines has many languages. Besides Filipino, there's Ilocano, there's Bisaya. So depending on, for example, what Nadia mentioned a while ago, if the issue is mining, we have to communicate the issue on how it affects their stomachs. Because if you only talk about mining, it just flies through. The idea just flies through. So it usually when we did, so I was involved in fighting against a coal-fired power plant back in 2018, and we had to talk about environmental justice. They didn't understand environmental justice. We had to talk about economy. They couldn't understand economy. And this is like the 90% just elementary school they haven't even graduated elementary school. So one thing that most people understand is food, shelter, and the effects of typhoon. So it's very short term, very the end of the first level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But when you communicate it that way to to the grassroots level, they understand it. So there, that's. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tina, for sharing. We still have 10 minutes. So far what I've gotten from Tina, take the advertising approach, and the content has to be short, brief, concise, but also localized. And we should be able to link it to cut issues, which I agree. Anyone else who would like to share what are the ideas that you think would be effective in communicating these issues, our advocacy, the grassroots level?
If I may add here, like talking from my past experiences, again, people resonate more when they are able to visualize that things. So as Tina mentioned, that we need to localize. So if we are looking from that point of view, we also need to focus on having graphics, visuals that will actually help them to understand, okay, this is how it's affecting me. That would be one thing. And second thing, to have more focus group discussions. We can have small groups in each communities, and they can take up the conversation and discussions within the community, how it is affecting them, how they can make a change, what actions they can play. So probably having smaller focus group discussion or self-help groups. Again, it depends how we want to call it.
Okay, thank you, Nazia. And I think it's also important, especially when working with grassroots communities or frontline or grassroots communities, it's important that we get their consent. They know what the materials are for. We return, we develop we co-design with them from the start to the finish, and we have to return it back to them. That's also part of ownership that we've also talked about, part of their participation, leadership, and agency, which is very important because they won't be able to understand or accept or promote these communication materials if they're not part of it. Okay, Nadia?
Also would like to echo to everyone's point over here. Also your point on consent, and especially depending on which community you are working with. For example, with Indigenous people, you should definitely adhere to free, prior, informed consent and know how to navigate around these areas. In some of the work that I do together with my organizations in bringing in young Indigenous women to participate in climate governance was that we engage with the youngsters first. I think that's very, I would say, it's also hard, but it's also one of the most rewarding because you can see things grow, right? And of course, and them being part of the stewardship, the ownership. I don't want to say ownership. I want to use the word stewardship here of the whole process is absolutely critical. Like, I think because I'm not Indigenous, right? I come from a very urban setting, and engaging with Indigenous people was quite hard because we're not living in those environments. However, we are also recipients of, we are also beneficiaries of their destruction in some ways. And what we do is that we train all these leaders of the young Indigenous leaders, and of course, later to support them to create their own programs at home. Because like I think Damia mentioned, I think it was Damia and Alisa who mentioned, they are the ones who knew better what's happening on the ground, right? And I think it's quite critical that we include this empowerment of young leaders to identify them as soon as possible. And there was actually another point I wanted to mention about how for them to be involved. Of course, eradicating all these structural issues that has been really the point of issue of them enabling themselves to participate in any decision making in all kinds of developments happening on their ground or in their indigenous lands. That is another thing, and for that to happen, it has to come from a governance perspective, and of course, bottom up has to be met by top bottom, right? All data that is produced by indigenous people, let's say about the documentation of the impacts that they're facing, health, etc., must also be regarded as data. They cannot be seen as what they have been normally been hearing this. These are gray data. These are data that coming from communities can't be used in whatever templates where the funders have or whatever templates where governments come in and collect data. It does not make sense because this is the realities of the people, and therefore there should be mechanisms to recognize this data, this lived realities. If we don't respect, we don't recognize these processes, then all this, whatever outcomes of data documentation, whatever solutions even that is documented on the ground is not being recognized, then people don't want to invest in these processes anymore. I've seen these processes, breakdowns of processes happening, and there's a lot of distrust between government and communities on the ground because of this, where people are so tired engaging, they organize themselves, mobilize themselves, finding finance to fund their programs, to fund their initiatives and campaign, but towards the end, their voices are not being heard at decision-making tables itself, and engaging with them has become just a point of view or just a point of ticking box exercise. And I think that's really critical to mention in whatever outcomes that we are talking about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Nadia. Sorry to cut you off. Maybe Maria Anna would like to add on. We have a few minutes, but we can have you as our final person to share.
You. Yes, as the past national president of the Philippine Institute of Environmental Planners, I've always advocated for strategic systems oriented communications that are supposed to be the center or the core for maintaining gender responsive climate action. So, drawing from both the theory of change framework and best practice, communication should be purpose-driven, audience-specific, and iterative. Moving beyond one-way messaging, participatory communication models engage target groups in co-creating messages and solutions. So methods include community consultations, focus group discussions, participatory media production, and crowdsourced storytelling, ensuring ownership and resonance. So I would like just to point out about the monitoring and evaluation and adaptive feedback that we need to integrate communications outcomes into the overall M&E framework, using both quantitative and qualitative. So we need to provide rapid feedback loops also, leverage on that, and such as post-event surveys, etc. Digital analytics and participatory appraisal to enable real-time strategy management. And lastly, I'd like also to suggest or recommend that we indeed develop the capacity of local actors, including women and youth, as community communicators, ensuring continuity beyond individual projects. So we need to provide resources and toolkits for local adaptation and ongoing message dissemination. So that's all.
Okay. Thank you so much, Miss Maria Anna. So I'll just wrap up before we officially close. Coming from Nadia's input, it's important that our communications are purpose-driven, iterative, and also she touched on how consent works, especially in the context of indigenous communities, cited examples on how we can engage, especially among young people, on our communication activities, and how is it important that we engage them. She also said something about looking at the systemic analysis when doing communications work. And Miss Maria Anna also said something about participatory communication models and capacitating local actors, moving beyond the, project timeline. And with that, I think we can all agree, coming from our session this afternoon, communications work is part of our community work, and it's also a collective in the sense that we co-produce, co-design, and co-partner with communities that we work with, whether it's with women, LGBTQIA, indigenous peoples, indigenous communities, and rural sectors. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas, sharing your thoughts. I hope we can continue on this conversation in some other similar opportunities. Damia, what's next? Should we nominate a reporter from this group?
So I think we're going to go back to the main room, and then Nazia will wrap up and give a closing. So we've taken note of everybody's.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we can discuss them later.
Okay.
So since we are short of time, there won't be a wrap up, but following the discussion, we'll be sending out the reports to everyone who joined us today. So yeah, let's get back to our main room then.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
See you in the main room.
Hey, climate finance is no fun.
It's tough, but we tried our best. We did.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just trying to peek and look if Danica and them are still talking. The other communications group.
I think we came up with good
No, yeah,
action.
we have quite
Yeah.
consistent actionable items. That's what I feel.
Yeah, we
Yes.
we too have that in our communications group actually. I would love to
thank
hear how
you.
did it go for the policy and health team?
Yeah, we had some very interesting discussions. We were just wrapping up. So apologies to Indra for, having your part cut off a bit at the end there. But maybe what we can all do is just to drop like a few pointers in the chat so everybody can know what was discussed.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Maisar. I think that's a great suggestion since we're also short on time. But I want to say welcome back to everyone, back to the main meeting room. We hope that you had a fruitful and productive discussion in your own breakout rooms with actionable outcomes that we can take away from this roundtable discussion today. So yeah, just a reminder, you can just put in a few points of your discussion in the chat while we proceed with some closing reflections and next steps. So I'd like to invite my colleague Nazia once again to share some of the her closing reflections and next steps. So over to you, Nazia.
Thank you, Anis. So as mentioned earlier, so we'll be putting in some of the points that we just discussed, and after the roundtable discussion itself, we'll be sending a proper report what was discussed in details in each breakout rooms. So the whole idea of having this roundtable discussion, what next? So focusing on that. So the idea here is that the key recommendations and suggestions that will come out from this roundtable discussion will be parked as agenda item for the upcoming Praxis conference on public policy that is being hosted by ISIS, which is Institute of Strategic and International Studies, Malaysia. So the pre-practice is scheduled for, if not mistaken, end of this month, and the praxis is being scheduled for August in 2025. So the focus will be on climate, peace, and security. So we will be bringing this element of gender and women to the climate, peace, and security, focusing on what are the climate stressors, how is this fueling social instability, women's leadership, and and also how can we move forward as an inclusive climate adaptation and peace building. So the call to action here to say is how are we going to make it a more gender sensitive climate policies and increased investment in gender data, and which is quite critical actually for sustainable peace and planetary health. So as also mentioned earlier by Puan or Lisa, that we'll be hosting the Women's Assembly on 11th of August. So it is also it'll be a platform where we'll be taking these recommendations to, and it will be a part of the discussion at Women Assembly as well. So huge steps we plan to take. Huge actions is already in pipeline. It is not going to be stopped here. It's just one small step that we have taken. And following up on to this, we'll be also hosting a couple of webinars, and we also plan to host a couple of sessions on capacity buildings of local communities as well. So taking this opportunity, I would like to thank everyone, all our speakers, all our discussants and participants and colleagues from Arrow and from the center. A huge thank you, and really grateful to have all of you today for this discussion. Over to you, Hanis.
Thank you, Nazia. Before we all go, so let's take a group photo. So it would be great if everyone could turn on your cameras for the photo. Okay, I think everyone has their cameras on. All right. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Another one. 1, 2, 3. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank